Hi friends! Today I'm going to tell you how to paint feathers. 4 months ago, I painted a set of illustrations in a beach boho style. You can find a link to that collection in the text below this video. All the elements in this beach boho collection are neatly coordinated in terms of their style and color. You can make so many wonderful compositions from them. But what would this collection be without all the feathers? In this lesson, I'm going to paint feathers that aren't so much realistic as elements of decor that designers can use for all kinds of projects. Unfortunately, I didn't notice right away that the camera got turned off, so a few minutes didn't get recorded. But it's not a big deal because I didn't paint anything particularly important during that time. I just filled in the feather with a single color. For this feather, I'm going to use 3 colors: a bright light blue, turquoise, and a darker turquoise. In order to paint the barbs of the feather, I'm going to use a brush with a thin and sharp tip. I take a little paint on the tip of the brush and carefully but quickly make a few strokes in the direction that the barbs grow from the shaft. Then, before the paint dries, I carefully blur it with some water. Working this way, I paint the whole feather step by step. You can see that I don't cover the whole of the feather, but leave some little bits. This gives the feather some texture and lightness. Step by step, layer by layer, I start to add darker shades. I decided to make the feather somewhat more dynamic and interesting, so I added some dark streaks. Well, there you have it. The feather is practically ready. I just need to add some individual barbs and the lower part will be finished. I decided to draw one more feather to show the whole process from start to finish. As the first step, I fill the whole feather with one color, then add water in a few places and blur the paint. Somewhere, I'll leave some unpainted parts. I do that intentionally to highlight the fact that I'm working with watercolors. These defects, as you could call them, give life to the work. I don't like over-styled or strictly botanical work because it loses all the joy of watercolors. That's why I often leave smudges and splashes that make the painting more artistic. I love when the paint flows and blends and you get this beautiful fluid convergence. For this feather, I also decided to do stripes so it wouldn't be entirely boring. You can see how during this process the paint ran a bit and filled in spots that I planned to leave bright. As long as the paint hasn't dried, this is easy to fix. Just grab a mixed brush with synthetic and squirrel's hair bristles. It's good to wash it and squeeze it dry before you put the tip right where you want to pick up the color. You can see that these parts have gotten brighter as the bristles have picked up the pigment. Don't forget to rinse and squeeze the brush frequently. Even if the paint dries, you can still pick up some of the pigment, but for that you'll need a firmer brush, and you won't get it quite so clean since the paint has already had a chance to deeply soak into the paper. Now I do exactly the same thing that I did with the first feather. Step by step, I paint in the details, working from brighter to darker hues. In this case, I don't use any reference. I paint from memory. I've already painted hundreds of feathers, and I remember what they look like. If you're painting a feather for the first time, it's best to find a photo or an actual feather and take your inspiration directly from nature. Now we come to the most interesting part. I do this very rarely, but if my goal is to create something decorative, I use acrylics, an acrylic marker, ink, or a gel pen. Some artists are very opposed to mixing mediums and say that it's cheating. I say that you can use whatever works for you. If it makes your painting better, then it doesn't really matter what you used to achieve your goal. In our case, a gel pen is really convenient. If you want to add details somewhere, it makes it really simple. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that the pen won't completely cover the paint, as it's a bit transparent, and after it dries, you won't achieve a completely white color. But an acrylic marker will cover the watercolors almost completely. I searched forever for a complementary marker that would let me add delicate details, and finally I found one. It's simply the ideal instrument. The line thickness is around 1 millimeter. Moreover, when you press harder or softer, you can control the thickness of the stroke. Of course, it isn't quite like a brush, but all the same, it's very convenient. Alongside markers, you can use a pen or white ink as a liquid masking film. In this case, you'll have a completely watercolor work, but that's not always convenient. It's harder to use a liquid masking film, but I'll talk about that later. Probably I'll do a separate lesson where I'll tell about all the pluses and minuses of using a liquid masking film. On the second feather, I show how you can use white acrylic ink for the same purpose as a marker. With ink, everything is a bit more difficult, though. You need stiff bristles because it runs and doesn't cover the watercolors as a marker does. But if you practice, you can learn to control the process and you'll have more potential than you would with a marker. I use this rather infrequently because it doesn't turn out very precise. Acrylics dry very quickly, so after you use a brush, you need to wash it thoroughly right away, or it will simply become unusable. Ink is more convenient than a marker because I can control the line thickness better. I can pick any brush and paint however it's comfortable for me. In this lesson, I described how to paint a feather and how to decorate it. I hope this lesson was helpful. Try something similar yourself, and don't be afraid to ask questions in the comments and show the results of your creative efforts. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. See you next time!